In 1848, when workers tore up the chapel floorboards of a forgotten girls' academy in Salem, they found something sealed beneath the altar. 47 leather-bound journals, all written in the same trembling hands of children, all ending the same way, with silence. But it wasn't the confessions of torture or the strange rituals that shook investigators. It was the names, the clients. Massachusetts' most powerful judges, bankers, ministers, documented in detail every visit, every payment. Within hours, the state locked the evidence away. It's still classified, but one confession survived. For 60 years, a woman carried the truth inside her, until the end of her life, when her body was wasted and her soul too heavy to hold secrets any longer. What she revealed was not just the horror of one family, but a system so refined, so ancient in its cruelty, that it has never stopped. It merely changed form. Tonight, I'm going to show you what was buried behind stained glass and lace curtains. What men in tailored suits called virtue, but practiced like predators. This is not just a ghost story, it's a blueprint. And by the time we're done, you'll never look at a chapel, a school, or a charitable institution the same way again. Because the Fairfax family didn't run a school, they ran a farm, and what they harvested was innocence. Salem in 1811 was a town desperate to erase its shame. The spectre of the witch trials still lingered like smoke in the rafters of its churches, but instead of purging hysteria, the city now courted respectability. And into this trembling pursuit of redemption stepped Victoria Fairfax, draped in black silk, speaking of salvation, education, and reform. She was unlike any woman Salem had seen, tall, austere, with silver eyes that did not blink. Her pedigree, impeccable, Virginia aristocracy, refined in London drawing rooms, baptized in the fire of widowhood after her husband's death in Charleston's yellow fever outbreak. But it wasn't grief that brought her north. It was ambition, and beneath that ambition was something colder, hungrier. She proposed an academy for young ladies, a sanctuary she called it, where orphaned girls and daughters of the poor could receive a Christian education free of charge. She purchased a massive Georgian mansion on Beacon Hill, long rumored to be cursed. Others fled it. She welcomed it. Renovations began. A chapel was added, dormitories, a dining hall, and on the third floor, sealed private chambers that weren't on any blueprint. Victoria didn't work alone. Her sister Evangeline, frail and musical, oversaw the girls' instruction, and her brother-in-law Bartholomew, a fire and brimstone preacher with a serpent's charisma, became the school's chaplain. Together they formed a trinity, one that appeared holy, but operated in shadows. The town applauded them, donated, sent daughters, and slowly, silently, the net drew tighter. They came with nothing but hope in their hands. 23 girls entered St. Mary's Academy on opening day, each carrying a name that would one day be sealed beneath chapel floorboards. Most were charity cases, orphans, fatherless, forgotten. Victoria called them blank slates, vessels waiting to be filled with virtue. But behind closed doors, she used a different phrase, unclaimed assets. Among them was Margaret Sullivan, red-haired, fierce-willed, plucked from a textile mill after her parents burned alive in a tenement fire. Priscilla Morse, a solemn reader, unwanted by her surviving relatives. Hannah Whitmore, pale and near-mute, abandoned in the Salem poorhouse after her mother vanished. These were not girls selected for potential, they were selected for disappearance. To the outside world, St. Mary's was a beacon. Girls in pristine uniforms sang hymns in perfect Latin. Visitors toured spotless classrooms adorned with Protestant maxims. Purity is power, obedience is grace. Donors left impressed, officials never asked questions, and the girls, terrified and trembling, learned quickly that to speak out meant to vanish. No one noticed that the third floor was always locked, that the same black carriages arrived after sundown, that certain girls were never seen again after entering those chambers, because when evil wears virtue's mask, it becomes untouchable. What Victoria Fairfax built was not a school, it was an institution of ritualized erasure. A system that preyed on the invisible, the voiceless, while society applauded her charity, and the first to vanish was Hannah. It began with a whisper, then a bruise. Mrs. Abigail Thornton, a seamstress from the base of Beacon Hill, was the first outsider to suspect. She delivered linens to the academy once a week, just enough to notice what others ignored. The girls were changing, their brightness dimmed. Margaret, once bursting with questions, now stared through windows like a ghost behind glass. Priscilla stopped reading. Even their steps became slower, as if something inside them had been taken. But it wasn't just the girls. It was the visitors. Men in tailored coats and wide-brimmed hats, arriving after sundown, entering through the side door that led only to the third floor. Always discreet, always gone before dawn. Their carriages bore no family crests, just polished black lacquer and silence. Some nights there were 2, other nights 6. Mrs. Thornton watched, counted, and worried. Then came the night of December 13th, 1812. Unable to sleep, she rose for tea. Through her kitchen window, she saw flickering light from the chapel, erratic, violent, not candlelight but torches, and then she heard it. Screaming, muffled, human, not one voice, but many, short bursts, terrified. Then silence, then another cry. For nearly an hour it continued. She pressed her face against the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain. She saw shadows dancing in the stained glass, twisted silhouettes, arms raised, bodies writhing. Then nothing. 3 days later, Hannah was dead. Fever, they said. But Abigail had heard the truth. She didn't die. She was offered. The funeral was swift, too swift. No family came. Hannah had none left. Victoria wore black lace and spoke of divine timing, God's will, spiritual release. But her voice held no tremor, no grief. It was performance, precise and cold. The chapel filled with song, but the notes trembled. Abigail stood far below on the cobbled path and listened. She said it sounded more like a ritual than a farewell. Evangeline's voice, so angelic it once stopped sailors mid-stride, cracked that day. And though few noticed, a line of soot streaked the chapel's leaded glass. Hannah's grave was marked with a plain wooden cross, no epitaph, no mention of her death in the local papers, just a name and 2 dates, carved without care, like a ledger entry. Weeks passed. Then another girl fell ill, and another. Bruises reappeared. Eyes grew glassy. The younger ones forgot how to speak. Victoria's answer was always the same: academic rigor, emotional strain, spiritual testing. But Abigail saw through the lie. These girls weren't being educated, they were being deconstructed. Because the Fairfax method wasn't about salvation, it was about refinement, breaking the will, removing identity, erasing origin, and turning innocence into currency, traded behind chapel walls, inked into leather-bound journals, and sold to men whose names you still read in your children's history books. And if you're still watching this, comment below. They erased the daughters, twice, to remember and to resist. By February of 1813, the air around St. Mary's had grown heavier, not with grief, but with compliance. No one spoke above a whisper. Eyes darted, backs straightened at the sound of approaching footsteps. Silence was no longer discipline, it was survival. Then 2 more deaths. Priscilla Morse found lifeless in her bed, a half-read book still resting on her chest. The cause? Natural causes, declared Dr. Edmund Fairfax, Victoria's cousin, conveniently also the district coroner. 3 days later, Mary Catherine O'Brien, another orphan, convulsed violently during morning prayer. Brain fever, they said. Another sealed box, another quiet burial behind the chapel. The Academy's records note these deaths with polite detachment. But Abigail Thornton was watching, and what she saw was a pattern. Every girl who died had one thing in common. They had no one, no father to raise a voice, no mother to demand answers. They were the ones no one would miss. The Fairfax method was selective, paying students, daughters of prominent families. They were treated differently, fed more, taught more, watched less. But the charity girls, they were offerings, flesh and name, stripped and catalogued. Their usefulness ended the moment they were too broken to sell, or too awakened to silence. Abigail wanted to speak, to scream, but who would listen to a seamstress? Who would dare accuse Victoria Fairfax, the saint of Salem, the savior of orphan girls, of ritual exploitation? So instead she wrote and waited. The mansion on Beacon Hill began to breathe like a living thing, exhaling secrets, inhaling silence. Doors that should have creaked Never did. Footsteps echoed in places no one should have been, and behind the third-floor chambers, faint sobs pressed against plaster like water behind a dam. The town, meanwhile, praised Victoria Fairfax more than ever. Local newspapers printed glowing tributes. The bishop called her a model of Protestant mercy. Donations increased, and the list of visiting dignitaries grew. Boston merchants, judges from Concord, even a state senator from Hartford, always after sundown, always unannounced. But it wasn't until Abigail overheard something during a linen delivery that the pattern locked into place. She was waiting by the dining hall, unnoticed, when Bartholomew Fairfax passed by two staff members speaking in low tones. One said, "Room 3's girl didn't scream this time. She just watched. As if detachment had become the only shield left, as if these girls, one by one, were learning not to feel pain, but to disappear inside it." The Fairfax doctrine wasn't about punishment, it was about separation, breaking the spirit into compartments so cleanly that even the victim wouldn't recognize their own face in a mirror. That's why the journals existed. Each girl instructed to write before bed, to reflect and confess. But in reality, those pages documented their descent, their resistance, their unraveling, their final surrender. Each entry a breadcrumb trail into institutionalized annihilation. And one journal survived. It was leather-bound, worn smooth by trembling hands. The ink had faded, but the scratches beneath it had not. The journal belonged to Margaret Sullivan, the fiery-haired girl who once believed education would save her. Instead, she chronicled her own descent, day by day, ritual by ritual, until her words turned into warnings. Abigail Thornton found it years later, hidden behind a loose stone in the chapel's foundation, wrapped in oilcloth, buried like contraband. It was not meant to survive. Inside, Margaret's handwriting begins steady, hopeful. Today, we sang, "Abide with me." I think Evangeline cried during the second verse. I feel proud, I feel chosen. But the tone changes quickly. 2 weeks later, they called me to the third floor, said I was to receive a private blessing. I heard footsteps, then the key turning. The room was so dark. Then, "I left my body tonight. I think it stayed behind." The entries became fragmented, paranoid. Names were scratched out, then rewritten. One page was soaked through with dried tears, or perhaps blood. Margaret was trying to leave a map, a record, a resistance. And on the final page, no words, just a single drawing. A girl with no eyes, no mouth, no hands, just a blank face, and black flames rising behind her. Abigail read the journal 3 times before sealing it away. Because in Margaret's silence, she saw the truth. The girls weren't being taught. They were being emptied. By spring of 1813, the academy had become a fortress of compliance. No laughter, no rebellion. Even the youngest girls walked in perfect lines, heads down, hands folded, voices extinct. The transformation was complete. Victoria Fairfax called it discipline, but Margaret had named it more accurately in her journal, disappearance training. It was Bartholomew who enforced the deepest levels of control. His sermons grew darker, stranger, more about sin's geometry, about the architecture of obedience. He warned of invisible spirits that could inhabit disobedient girls, that only through total surrender could one be purified. And the girls believed him, or at least they feared not believing. Then came the naming ritual. Every month, girls were gathered in the chapel under flickering torchlight. One by one, they would be called forward and stripped of their birth names. Instead, they were given new titles: mercy, silence, temperance, chastity. Names chosen not for identity, but for control, to erase their past, their story, their power. These ceremonies were witnessed by outsiders, benefactors, Victoria called them, always male, always cloaked in anonymity. They did not speak, they simply watched. And each time a girl stepped forward, a journal was updated, not by her, but by Evangeline, whose trembling hands copied every detail. Margaret's journal ends the night before her naming. Abigail would later write, "That was the last time I saw her with eyes full of fire. The next morning, she was just another silence." The Fairfax method was working, too well. Summer arrived, but no sunlight reached inside the academy. Thick curtains were drawn, mirrors removed, the windows were painted over to protect the girls' modesty, Victoria claimed. But the truth was simpler. Light revealed too much. Evangeline had grown pale, thinner. Once a lively singer, she now barely spoke above a whisper. Her eyes seemed lost, as if she were watching something no one else could see, or trying to forget something she couldn't unsee. Abigail noticed bruises that no one discussed, scratches on wrists, hollow stares during prayer, and the strange absence of 3 girls whose names had been erased from roll call with no explanation. Even more troubling was the appearance of the Book of Revisions, a red-bound ledger Victoria carried during inspections. It wasn't just for tracking behavior, it dictated futures. Next to each girl's name were symbols, triangles, crosses, flames, and a circle with a line through it. That mark meant nullified. No graduation, no future placement, no family letters. Just gone. One afternoon, Abigail followed the scent of burning paper down to the furnace room. She found Evangeline standing over the flames, feeding in small folded notes. When confronted, the girl wept and said, "They told me I had to. They said the girls weren't real anymore." It was then Abigail knew. The academy was not just erasing identity, it was practicing ritual unmaking, turning orphans into blanks, souls into obedience. And something darker was waiting at the heart of it all. A door that only opened for the nullified, a room no one returned from. The door was made of blackened oak, iron-banded, half-hidden behind a velvet tapestry embroidered with a burning chalice. It was called the Hollow Room, though no official map showed its location. But every girl whispered about it, and every girl feared it more than death. It was where the final rituals occurred. Victoria Fairfax called it the Sanctuary of Renewal, but those who entered emerged altered, if they emerged at all. Some reappeared weeks later, expressionless, speechless, names forgotten. Others never returned. At dusk on July 19th, Evangeline was summoned to it. Abigail begged her to pretend illness, to hide beneath the stairs, but Evangeline only smiled faintly and said, "He already knows my scent." Then she handed Abigail a folded page, the last page of Margaret's journal, torn out and stained with tears. It read, "When the flames surround you, do not run. They are not burning you, they are burning through you. What remains will not be yours." That night, Abigail waited by the chapel doors, heart pounding. She heard nothing. But at midnight, a sound echoed down the corridor. Not footsteps, dragging, and a low, hollow humming, like someone imitating a hymn but forgetting the melody halfway through. Evangeline was never seen again. The next morning her bed was gone, her journal gone, her name scraped off the wall roster. And yet, the tapestry near the hollow room had changed. Where once the chalice burned with white flame, now it was black. And beneath it, stitched in thread no child could have sewn, was a single word, empty. Abigail Thornton began to unravel. Not in madness, but in clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when every lie around you begins to rot, and all that's left is the stench of truth. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, and then, one night she started writing. Not in the open, not in any approved journal, but with a sharpened button on the underside of her bed frame. She carved her thoughts into the wood, backwards, in code, in verses that mimicked hymns but held warnings within. She wrote, "They preach submission, but what they want is vacancy. They are not teaching us to serve, they are teaching us to vanish." What kept her sane was the rhythm of the lies, the pattern. She started tracking them like a mathematician would track variables. Every naming led to a loss of appetite. Every inspection followed by a furnace run. Every nullified girl replaced in 3 days. Not by a new orphan, but by a copy. A mirror. A girl with the same face but different eyes. It was the eyes that told Abigail the truth, the way they moved without curiosity, how they blinked too slowly, like they'd forgotten how time worked. She watched one of the new girls at dinner. The girl chewed without swallowing. Just chewed. When Abigail whispered, "What's your name?" the girl answered, "Obedience." No hesitation, no fear, just programming. That's when Abigail understood. Something was being inserted into the girls, not just an ideology, but a presence, a second will, a parasite with patience. It didn't want their bodies. It wanted their histories, their lineage, their bloodlines. And the Fairfax Academy wasn't a school. It was a vessel. That night, Abigail dreamed of her mother's voice, not soft, not loving, but interrupted, like a memory corrupted by static. Each time she tried to recall her mother's face, it blurred. The more she clung to it, the more it dissolved. When she awoke, she couldn't remember her mother's name. It had begun. She wasn't just being watched now, she was being rewritten. At breakfast, she noticed her fork was missing, then her shoes, her old prayer book, her hairbrush, every personal item, quietly removed. The other girls acted as if she'd never owned them. Even worse, she began to doubt it herself. When she confronted Sister Mercy about the missing items, the woman smiled gently and said, "My child, you've never had such things. You came to us clean." Clean meant something else now. That afternoon, Abigail snuck into Victoria's office during chapel. On the desk was a sealed document, thick parchment stamped with a crimson seal shaped like a seven-eyed serpent. It read, "Initiation schedule, full integration, August 1st. Her name was fourth on the list. She flipped to the last page. There, in elegant ink, "They must be emptied of self before the vessel can claim them. Memory is the soul's anchor. Cut it." And beneath that, a single line scribbled in shaky black ink. "She who remembers becomes the fire." It wasn't just doctrine, it was a war strategy. They were building hosts, not for a god, not for virtue, but for something older than belief, something that needed new skins to walk in. And Abigail, she still remembered. For now, Abigail ran. Not out the front gates, those were always watched, but down into the laundry cellars, past the rusted cisterns, behind the limestone where the Academy's foundation met earth. There she found a tunnel, crude, damp, forgotten. A path that once led to Salem Harbor when the house belonged to smugglers. She didn't take anything, just the journal page, and Margaret's name scratched into her arm with a broken comb, a reminder of who she was before they could take it. But she wasn't alone in the dark. Halfway through, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, barefoot. When she turned, no one was there, but the whisper came anyway. "Come back. You are unfinished." She pressed forward, dirt collapsing around her, the walls groaning. She emerged hours later, soaked in mold and moonlight, on the edge of the wharf. Salem's church bells rang in the distance. Morning was coming. She tried to tell the town, first to the constable, then to the pastor, then to the mayor, but their eyes, they didn't blink. They listened politely, then assured her she must be tired, delirious, overwrought with grief from losing her dear friend Evangeline. They offered her tea, a place to rest, a return to the Academy, just until you're better. She realized then, the Fairfax reach was deeper than brick and doctrine. It was woven into the bones of the town, into the men who built its ships, into the churches, the courts, the very bloodlines of New England. Abigail didn't sleep for 3 days. She knew they would come for her. But before they did, she wrote it all down. Everything. They found her body on the 4th of August, 1841. Face down in the reeds along Gallows Creek. No wounds, no bruises, just a strange, deliberate absence, like something had been drained from within. The official cause was listed as exposure, but the local fisherman who discovered her said otherwise. He claimed her eyes were wide open, lips parted in a half-smile, like she'd seen something before the end, something so vast it broke her, but left her grateful. He whispered to his wife that night. She looked like she'd just escaped hell, and missed it. They buried her in an unmarked grave. The Academy sent no flowers, but they did send 2 sisters to retrieve something from the body, a folded scrap of cloth hidden beneath her tongue. It was a map, a rough sketch of the tunnel, the harbor, and beneath it all, a circular symbol drawn in ash, the same seven-eyed seal that adorned the Fairfax records. The Academy burned 3 weeks later. Fire with no origin, no accelerant, no lightning, only smoke rising from every floor at once, as if the building had exhaled its own secrets. 17 girls perished, or so the report claimed. But for years afterward, strange sightings spread along the eastern coast, of identical girls appearing in different towns, wearing the same pale dresses, speaking in unison, asking for Father Fairfax. Some say the fire freed them, others say it scattered them, vessels still in waiting. And in a sealed archive beneath the Salem Historical Society, there's a final line scrawled in Abigail's code, preserved in faded ink. They are not gone, only loosed.